This podcast is brought to you by Ingrok. If data is the lifeblood of a modern IT organization, Ingrok is the circulatory system moving that data from where it is to where it needs to be with a seamless, easy-to-use SaaS offering. Maybe you're trying to standardize the application delivery policies for your organization across multiple data centers or cloud environments. Or you're building a SaaS offering that needs to deploy and manage software inside customers' networks that you don't control. Or you need to be able to connect to IoT devices regardless of which network those devices live on. Ingrok allows you to access that data in a way that is both developer and CISO friendly. For more information, contact Ingrok today. And now, on to our show.
Can I get the icon in cornflower blue?
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 30 of Can I Get That Software in Blue? I'm one of your hosts, Chad Tyndall. Along with me is my co-host, a superlative slinger of SaaS sales supplying spectacular solutions to satisfied subscribers, the emperor of empathy with a drive to achieve that you won't believe, Steve Mazak, everybody.
Thanks for the intro, Chad. As usual, great intro. I will hope to live up to these one day.
I went with alliteration. I was a little alliteration happy on this one, but it was fun.
Are you learning how to alliterate words more with ChatGPT? Is that what's happening?
I was starting with the word customer, and I couldn't think of a good S word that started with that, and it suggested subscriber, which I thought was perfectly appropriate. So, yeah, it helped me there a little bit. But I was thinking about words that rhyme with Steve all day, so I got achieve and believe, and I got that in there. So, I'm on the subway coming home from the office today. I'm kind of working on my rhymes.
Yeah, it's nice to know you're thinking about me on the subway, Chad. I appreciate it.
All day long. I'm listening to the Wolfram interview on Lex Friedman, and at the same time, I'm working on my rhymes with the other half of my brain. Well, as promised, when we started this podcast, anytime we record a show late at night, we booze it up. So what are you drinking tonight, Steve?
I'm drinking a little bit of vodka with some Sprite.
You're going old school, like a college drink. I love it.
What do I have on hand that's quick and easy?
I love it. Well, Sonia's family came to visit from Israel, and they brought a bottle of Israeli red wine. So that's what I'm drinking.
Really? Is it good?
What was in the kitchen. It's good, yeah. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon blend. I've never had Israeli wine before, but it's pretty good.
I just found out they had it a few years ago, and I was like, Shai, did you know this? He and I are going to have to go do a wine and whiskey tour in Israel because they're starting to come out with more spirits.
I mean, they make whiskey there, too.
Whiskey, yeah, there's whiskey, yeah.
That always changes the nature of the episode when we are a glass or two in, so we'll see how that goes. We have a special guest today. Our moms were neighbors and best friends as little girls, so I grew up around him when we were little kids, too. He used to come over and play Nintendo at my house. He probably beat me, kids are always beating you, the younger kids can do it better. He also went to the finest university on the West Coast, California Polytechnic at San Luis Obispo. He studied physics, but now he's the SVP of Predictive Analytics at Hard Rock Gaming, where he's claiming to be aiming at making it raining. Earl Mitchell, welcome to the show.
I like that. Thank you very much for the intro, Chad. Good to see you again.
Mitch, I think you're going to have to put that on your business card.
Yeah, LinkedIn's getting updated immediately.
You can do it. I'll give you credit. You can do it. One of the reasons I like talking with smart people who studied physics, and my college roommate was a physics major too. He's the same way. Not only are they just generally crazy smart, like a mathematician, their brain is just trained to think in abstractions, which kind of allows them to deeply understand and make connections between seemingly unrelated topics. So while we're going to start maybe with some topics our regular listeners might be familiar with, I really have no idea where this conversation is going to go, especially since we're drinking. Mitch, what are you drinking tonight, actually?
I've got a single malt Tomatin Scotch.
How many years? What are we working with?
12? 14.
14.
I stepped up a notch for you guys.
That's an odd vintage for a Scotch. I know 12 and 15. I've never seen a 14. All right. Well, is it a peaty one or not? Not peaty.
No, it's smooth.
That's what I like. I don't like the heavy peat. I feel like I'm drinking a cigar or something. I don't know.
I go peat sometimes, but, when you have to speak and I'm worried about coughing or something, try to dodge the peat.
I bought this bottle of Dalmore. That's Dalmore. It just says cigar on it. I was like, oh, this should be good for cigars. And I wanted to try it one night, and I took a sip, and it tastes like liquid cigar. It's like disgusting. So I've been waiting to have it with a cigar, but I'm not going to smoke one by myself, so got to have some company over. I just thought it was funny. It's like, oh, just take some ash from a cigar, put it in a Scotch, rebrand it, and sell it for $200, and you're good to go.
That's intense. We went to Whiskeys of the World one year in San Francisco, and Compass Box was there, and they have one called the Peat Monster. It's just like that. It's just like licking an ashtray or something,
I've had a friend describe it as the taste of burnt Band-Aids. which I thought was actually
That's a good one. Yeah.
pretty spot on. Yeah.
Burnt Band-Aids.
But I like it. I don't know what that says about me, right?
All right. Well, all right. We're starting off good. I'm going to take a drink and then we'll dive in. All right. Cheers. So let's start with a light question. Do humans actually have free will, or are we just a giant LLM neural net trained with quadrillions of parameters and a brain that evaluates that equation super fast?
Chad, bringing the heat right away.
Guys, I just wanted to start with something light,
Mitch, after you answer this, will you tell us the meaning of life too, please?
No, I mean, I'm going to hold that one. That'll be pod number 2 when we,
That's a sequel. Yeah.
The second coming of Mitch. That's perfect.
The apex intelligence.
No, it's a super interesting question. I've surfaced that internally in our channels. We're talking about generative AI all the time, right? And thinking about what are these things actually doing? For the LLM, it really is just next token prediction, right? They're just predicting the next word, but it turns out if you're sophisticated enough at doing that, really interesting things come out. And I posited that you can't tell me that we're not doing something totally similar, right? Every argument back to me was like, yeah, but they're not there's no internal representation of states. And I was like, you don't have that either, right? You have a bunch of columnar computing cells, stitched together in this infrastructure in your brain, right? And nothing about it is abstract in any way in the way we think about concepts. It's just, we have this internal representation, which we think is very special, but it's all hallucinated effectively.
Yeah, it's a big shared hallucination. That's what we call reality. The fact that you can predict human behavior statistically, right, at a large population level, just tells you, I do not think we actually have free will because it is predictive. Maybe not for an individual, right? But
yeah,
for the population.
I don't even know what it would mean to say we have free will. What does that mean? At any moment, you could do anything? Well, yeah, that's true, right? But the thing you choose to do, you couldn't have then gone back and chose to do something else, right? So even to say, do we have free will? It's kind of a non-question, right? Because there's no way you could do something other than what you're about to do next.
But the point is that what you're about to do next is actually just a function of the chemicals in your body and an internal state of what I'm at right now. And that is going to determine what I'm about to do next.
But that has very interesting implications for like morality, what we think about what happens to us and what we do. If you end up doing something that doesn't work out great or is even viewed from societal perspective as, immoral, the reaction to that shouldn't be, well, we need to teach them a lesson or something. The reaction to that is really, well, there's something wrong with the circumstances or the processing, but it's not like they made a bad choice. Like moralizing about it isn't necessarily going to change the pattern, right? And from like a personal perspective, when you think in these terms, it's actually like a nice framing for making mistakes. Should I blame myself and, worry so badly that I should have done something else? No. But if I take that to be formative, change my own pattern for the next iteration, I can do something better. It's a useful question. I just don't think the free will side, I don't know what it would mean to say that we have it.
Well, it's interesting, Mitch. Like you could almost argue that our brains are machines that just have to be constantly doing something. Because I don't know if you've ever tried to sit down and meditate and how hard that is, especially when you try to do it after you haven't done it in a long time, to sit there and be silent. It almost is like it takes an active or conscious decision to sit there and think about and do nothing and observe. And that to me is kind of weird when you think about us being prediction machines. Is there something in us that's just constantly going, has to be chewing on something, and so it just grabs shit, random shit, and it just is chewing through it? Like, I used to have this experience when I was coding all the time where I'd run into a problem and I couldn't figure it out. And the best way to figure it out was to take a break and not think about the problem, not talk about it with anyone else, just let it sit there in my brain. And 9 times out of 10, the next day I come back in with the solution ready for me.
Usually, when it would happen to me, usually either I came up with a solution in the shower, that was the most common one, or sometimes I awoke with the answer. In the middle of the night, I just woke up with the answer to the question. And I would have to go immediately sit and program and get it out and solve the problem. And so your brain doesn't shut down, yeah.
There's a lot of interesting stuff, like I've been just recently getting into about how the brain is actually working. Like they're modeling basically the feed forward networks versus the feedback networks. And there's more feedback from the top down going back to your, the areas of your brain closer to your sense organs. There's 10 times as many directional networks going that way than going back up from the sense organs to the neocortex, which the, sort of weird thing about that, many people would think it was the other way around. But the idea is that what your neocortex is doing is actually building a model of the world and sending that model back down to your sense organs and then correcting for an error term. You can imagine if you're sitting there meditating with zero stimulus, maybe part of the weirdness of that is you don't have any error term to check against. So your brain is just searching for something, right?
Yeah, that's like being in one of those tanks, sensory deprivation tank or something, right? The brain just kind of freaks out because it doesn't know what to do.
So, Mitch, I don't think I fully grasped what you said. Does that mean that there's 10 times the amount of bandwidth from my eyes to my brain than from my brain to my eyes? Am I thinking about
Other
that
way
right?
around.
So there's 10 times as much bandwidth from my brain to my eyes to send information to my eyes than to bring it in.
Yeah. I guess to your eyes is not necessarily the right framing, but from your neocortex to the areas of your brain closer to your sense organs.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
10 times the data flowing top down versus bottom up.
Yeah, that is the opposite of what I would have thought. Like, even with your eyes, the reason I go to my eyes is because, everything's so visual. There's just constant information coming at you.
Is there an evolutionary reason why it would be that way?
Well, I think, generative AI, when you think about what it's doing, when you start from just a blob image and you start constructing using deep neural networks an image around that to match some target image, right? You're really doing error correction at every point along the way.
You basically have to say no. You're having to say no a lot and then yes once for each pixel, for example. That basic idea.
Yeah. I mean,
I can tell. Yeah, I can tell. Yeah, I'm oversimplifying.
Yeah. There's a lot of math between that, but basically, right? You're always looking for the error term versus what you're expecting.
Chad, that was a great question to start us off with. Now we're completely
Yeah, you really knocked it out of the park, Chad.
Yeah, different. We're going down a different path than I thought we were going to.
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually expect us to talk about that for 5 minutes, but here we are.
I started drinking my scotch a lot faster when you asked that question.
I bet. I want to keep going down that path. But let's talk about some of the IT stuff first, and then we'll get back to this AI topic. So you're the SVP of Predictive Analytics at Hard Rock Digital. Why don't you tell us what Hard Rock Digital is, first of all?
Yeah, sure. So Hard Rock Digital is a joint venture formed between the digital side and Hard Rock International, which is the sort of storied brand we all know and love. They had yet to join the online sports betting secular growth that was occurring, and they were definitely the most powerful hotel and casino brand out there that hadn't yet stepped into the ring. So about 2.5 years ago, we formed Hard Rock Digital with myself and a bunch of other, well, I wasn't a founder, but a lot of our executive team I had worked together with before. So we brought all our experience from our past ventures to bear, and we've been at it for about 2.5 years. We do online sports betting and iGaming, right? And then we have a bunch of free-to-play games as well, but everything in the digital space versus the brick and mortar hotel and casino experience and cafes and all the rest that Hard Rock does.
So it's not just sports betting, but you also have online blackjack and those types of games too?
Yeah, where legal. So right now it's just in New Jersey.
Your main competitors in sports betting, I'm guessing, are DraftKings and FanDuel, those types of apps, right?
Yep.
See, I think of sports betting as sort of a commodity type thing, right? If I'm going to place a bet, I mean, unless someone's offering me better odds or a better line, then why would I care about one versus the other than, maybe the VIG that they're charging or something like that? What does Hard Rock Digital bring to kind of pull people away from those other platforms?
It's a great question. Our focus has been from the start on the customer experience when betting, which, if you've had any experience using overseas betting apps or been in the space for a while, you realize, as you're saying, a lot of the apps are commoditized. They're basically large Excel spreadsheets you land on, and you can sort through them and, find what you want to bet on. And the US customer base has a unique expectations of what apps feel like to use. We want to open an application and it to know what we like to bet on and it to present exactly what I want without me having to search through several lists and, the whole personalization angle. So we do have features that are unique to us. We're launching a couple special parlay types and different bet types that aren't available on other applications. But I think the real thing that sets us apart is our focus on that user experience, the simplicity of our app. When, we're one of the top rated apps, basically, even though our market share is, much lower than the likes of FanDuel, we're like consistently rated as a top app with the FanDuel app, and our app experience is very different from what you would feel on FanDuel. So we're kind of standing apart in that domain. And I think in the longer term, just our footprint for our omni-channel is massive. I don't think we've taken full advantage of that yet, but definitely as we move forward, you won't be able to get a better combined online casino, online sportsbook, real world casino, real world sportsbook, real world hotel experience all in one package than you can get from Hard Rock.
So that'd be like the way that I might give my rewards card to, a floor manager if I'm gaming in person to get free nights or, free buffet meal or something like that. I can maybe in the future I'll be able to earn rewards for a Hard Rock physical casino by gambling at the Hard Rock digital casino. That type of thing.
Yeah.
That's really
absolutely.
smart.
Imagine how cool it is if you're online play and then, you've placed a couple bets and now you can go, get a steak at the Hard Rock or get a room,
That's a great idea. I think about back when I was playing poker a lot and I was, spending all this time on online poker, but it didn't give me any free nights to go to Vegas. Had to actually go to Vegas and get free nights there. So I think that's a really smart omni-channel strategy that I haven't heard other casinos talk about.
I was just thinking like those cool digital slot machines where you sit down in the Vegas hotels. It'd be cool if like you offered me some incentive to transfer my game to my phone so I could keep playing while I'm at dinner or something. Not great for me as a gambler, but great for Hard Rock.
Yeah, Steve. I mean, maybe just enjoy your dinner,
Take a break, Steve.
Hey, I have a buddy that just won $7,500 from one of those slot machines.
He can't even buy 2 pairs of those headphones that you're wearing.
That's a callback. Love it.
Yeah, callback.
Oh, man. Okay. Steve, any question you want to ask?
Yeah, Mitch, can I talk? I want to talk about the tech that you guys use a little bit. Well, talk in high-level terms or broad terms first. Are you guys using cloud? Do you use your own data centers? Like, how do you think about that?
It's a very interesting regulatory landscape that we're navigating in sports betting. So don't want to go too far in the weeds, but you have to have physical footprints in states that you operate in. And we're really operating, several different books in accordance with the laws of every geo we operate in. That said, customer wants a unified experience, right? So you don't want to have to download a New Jersey app and then a New York app and, which used to be the state of the world just a couple years ago.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that bad. Like,
I didn't know there were separate, DraftKings apps and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, there were people who were going from New Jersey and Pennsylvania and like switching apps, because they had different balances on different apps and they didn't talk to each other, right?
I remember reading about people walking from Manhattan across the GW Bridge so they could place their Super Bowl bets in New Jersey and then coming home to watch the game.
That's so funny.
Yeah, our tech team's in Austin, but I have one member in Boston. And so he is our like Northeast test guy, right? Dan, you got to go cross the bridge and, place a bet in this region.
So that's a pretty unique requirement.
Yeah, definitely. But we're heavy cloud for everything outside of just meeting those specific regulations, right?
And are the regulations, I imagine they're more specific than just you have to have a presence. Is it about the data staying in the state? Is that kind of how to think about it?
Yeah, the bets need to be struck in every specific geo.
So that's a unique requirement. What else do you think is unique to the gaming betting world that like a regular e-commerce developer or SaaS developer might not really appreciate?
Yeah, one of the more interesting things has to do with customer value. You're very rarely going to pick up a customer that has a negative $1 million value in e-commerce.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not even clear how that would happen, right? But for us, it's totally viable that we pick up a customer that is just a super sharp player and we don't recognize it. And, they actually have a negative long-term value on the platform.
How is that possible? I thought the gaming lines were always structured such that the casino made a profit because they balanced the bets on both sides.
Right. Certainly for the most part, it's very hard to beat the books, right? But there are syndicates out there. There are, very sharp data people. I used to do my own daily fantasy sports version of modeling and betting and all this stuff. And it's not impossible to make money doing it. But, we actively set lines and things to make sure that we're profitable in the long run and that what we're providing is entertainment, right? Not an avenue for anybody to get rich quick. But comparatively, people will come in and place a 10-to-1 parlay and for a $10 bet and win $100 out of the gate, right? That's not a bad customer, right? They just are a winning customer, even though for us, they have a negative value straight away, right? And on the other side, a customer that comes in and loses doesn't necessarily mean they're a great customer. They could, long term be a winning sports bettor. So it's a very interesting thing to model from understanding your customer value. That's kind of my domain is trying to figure out who's valuable and who is out to get us.
I guess I still don't understand how this works, because just because one person's winning, doesn't it mean that someone else is losing by even more on the other side, so that the middleman can make a profit? Or it doesn't work that way?
That would be an exchange market where the price, that's more like a stock market situation. And those are actually some of the biggest books in the world are those, but they're overseas and they're two people making a market together, right? For all books in the US, that's not how it works. So the house has to set odds, and anyone who is willing to accept those odds and is within the terms and service and all the rest that we have, right, can take that bet. So it's totally possible for everyone to come into us and everyone to bet one side of a proposition if everybody liked the same side. And then we would have a liability, right, if we were to lose that bet.
So setting the odds is really important to be accurate as you can be.
Well, there's kind of two strategies. So you can set a really huge margin and not care about your prices, which is really bad customer experience. I think the way things are going is actually setting a tighter, in our baseball product, for instance, we have notoriously kind of low, or not low margin. I would say they're different propositions versus the marketplace, right? So we see people come in and see our price being very different from other prices and piling into our baseball propositions, but we're trusting that model and willing to take a stand against it, right? So it's a cat and mouse game for sure with bettors and people setting the odds.
So Mitch, before you had the power of all the tools that you have today, how was this done, like manually? Was it just people doing math on notebooks and trying to figure out what the odds were and what to set the price at? And now it's just all digitized?
I don't want to present like I am setting these odds, right? It's not
Fair. Yeah, that's fair. I assume there's other people around, like inputs and outputs.
Right. There's third parties. Their whole business is to set the odds out for companies. And then companies like us will take the odds in and model off them even further to refine their own view of things. But yeah, that is a whole industry in and of itself.
I didn't realize that. So there are people that just set odds. That's their whole job for every possible thing you could bet on.
Yeah, I always thought that the odds lines were based on how the betting went. So I didn't realize that I could make $1 million bet even if there wasn't $1 million bets on the other side.
We will certainly react to that, right? When our liabilities go up in one direction, we'll move the line, right, to accommodate.
So Mitch, how do you guys decide what's a bettable event? Is that something that like a team of people do?
Yeah, we have a whole trading team. They sort of manage the book, and there's, again, heavily regulated, so we don't really get to decide, right?
Oh, so you can't say like, hey, on the next play in this game, like if they get a field goal, like there's an extra thing. You can't just randomly do that whenever you want.
Well, within limits. We know what the regulations are, so we're kind of bounded by what geo we're working in. But yeah, and you have to get regulatory sign off for anything, basically.
Okay.
You can issue real-time propositions, like during the game.
Yeah, we have a stable, right? We have a pricing engine and a stable that outlines what we can and can't have folks betting on, right? But within that, and any given geo, there are propositions that they've said, this doesn't work for us, or,
Mitch, can you give us an example of something that the regulators will not let you offer as a bettable event? Something innocuous?
I don't want to say anything. Regulators are...
All right, well, maybe I'll try it this way. We can delete this too. But if I wanted to bet on whether or not LeBron James is going to drink his Gatorade in the first 2 minutes of the basketball game, is that a bettable event?
Honestly, I can't answer that question. It can have different answers for different geolocations, and there's a whole process I'm not like involved in for determining all of that.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I was just wondering if we're slowly going to this world of where like you can basically bet on anything you want, anywhere, anytime. And you can log on to one of these betting platforms and just make random bets about world events or anything, you know? But maybe the regulators will slow that down, so it's going to be a long while before we get to a place like that, potentially.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, there's a lot of demand for betting in unorthodox things like esports, for instance, right? There's a lot of esports betting going on. And that gets very interesting because esports is just a video game. So now are we saying any video game we can bet on, right? And how does that work?
Well, if you do, then how do you regulate it to prevent the e-gamers from cheating or throwing a game or something like that? Like, we kind of know how to do that in baseball and football, but that's not something that we think about when we're just watching a video game going.
I'm not convinced that we know how to do that in the real world. I say the organic world versus the digital world.
Well, certainly people have been prosecuted for it. So, we have proven it in court, at least to some degree, right? Pete Rose and the Chicago Black Sox and whatever, right?
Yeah, esports is interesting because like the opportunities for gaming things, no pun intended, I think is much higher and much easier to hide, right? Like the developers could actually impact the outcome of a game if they wanted to, right? In real time, they could make a change on the server side based on a bet they made. And all of a sudden your character's nerfed just slightly so you don't really notice, but you lose that match. And that was the outcome the developer wanted.
Yeah, I think the upside though is adoption, right? Like if it makes your sport more interesting and entertaining, then there's incentive to like figure it out.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that things get more intense or exciting when there's something else on the line than just your love of a team, right? It's, if they win, I win. If they lose, I lose. But
that's why people bet. Well, it's funny because hanging out with poker players and professional gamblers in general, they're always making prop bets to each other, just side bets, right? I'll just sit at the poker table and be like, $10,000, the next card's a red card or whatever. They'll literally just do anything. Or they'll bet each other. Like I remember one was a vegetarian and someone bet him that he couldn't $10,000 if you can eat a cheeseburger and not throw up, for 30 minutes. They'll do anything they can bet on. They'll bet on.
I think my favorite weird bet was, I think it was a World Series of Poker where someone bet another person there that they couldn't navigate the entire weekend doing only lunges. So they couldn't walk normal at all.
That's so
Right?
random. Did they do it?
I don't think the guy made it. I can't remember what happened, but I think it was too much after the second day, like he could barely move.
Just walk into your room and back from the table. Yeah, forget it.
After the second lunch, I'd cry, Uncle. There's no way I can make it to the second day.
Take my 10 grand. I give up. Well, you're talking about these marketplaces. Are there Ethereum sports betting applications that work on chain that use, are you aware of anything like that?
I mean, I'm sure you can find it. I wouldn't know where they are.
I like this idea that Steve had that, we're moving towards a future where you can bet anybody on anything. So the idea that someone could issue a proposition on Ethereum that, is backed by some oracle that goes and pulls, whatever real information from the world. That's a cool idea.
It's an interesting idea. I think there's a lot of, we often try to think about, more standard but innovative things in our space, right? Standard bets, but ways to do them differently, ways to do them in a more exciting package, basically. But you run into very quickly, like the devil's in the details, right? Like you have to be able to price something, and that's often very complicated. And that price has to stay fresh with real-time information. And, there's just a lot that goes into, I think people underestimate the difficulty of building like a sports book, right? It's a pretty difficult application to put together.
Let's give people a visual of what this kind of architecture looks like, if that's okay. Like you have these, applications running, and then you have all these inputs coming in from like an event. So let's say there's a basketball game going on and people are betting. You have to be consuming those events to inform whether or not you need to update any odds or anything like that or any prices. And this is happening all the time for any event that anyone can bet on in your ecosystem. And so, okay, so does that mean that you guys have to have relationships with all of the sports companies like NBA, NFL, you name it? Do you have a relationship with them? Do you have to pay for that data feed, or do they just give it to you as a partner?
No, every feed has a cost.
You have to pay for that feed.
So you'll get a feed that'll be like, LeBron took a shot, it was a 3-pointer and he missed it, and like whatever, all the single details about it that anybody could bet on or have a parlay on.
That plus an update to every price that was affected by that event. And if that feed is delayed by 6 seconds, then someone sitting at the game in a bettable jurisdiction can try to take advantage of that.
Or
Right.
like front running a stock trade or something.
Exactly.
This is really interesting. That means the SLAs have real consequences in this world.
This is direct financial results, right?
Yeah, there's like real life consequences here when things go bad.
Is that a case that you've seen where someone is more profitable because you could tell they're at the live game?
That's part of what I do is, are we seeing malfeasance happen, right, in real time?
Well, that's not malfeasance that they went to a game and were making bets, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, like you said, Chad, is front running.
No, but they're not doing anything illegal. They're betting on what they've seen with their own eyes. That's, there's no inside information.
Violating terms of service, definitely.
It's your term of service says you can't make a bet while you're at the event?
No, but you can't try to like front run us, right? If you're front running lines, we're not obligated to take that business.
Yeah, okay. So it's more like card counting where you could just be like, we don't want your business anymore. You just have to leave. I see. They haven't done anything illegal. They just can't play anymore.
Yeah, we're not coming after them, right? But they're not going to take any more bets.
So that's like a whack-a-mole game. Like it's got to be constant. And it's probably not the same thing over and over again. There's new problems that you guys have to deal with, I imagine, right? Like as cell phone technology changes, bandwidth changes. Like I know at a sporting event when I go to, like cell service is almost impossible. So my phone's really only good for pictures.
It used to be that way. But I went to the Mets game last week and I took a Zoom call from my seat because, I swear to God, because I had scheduled this doctor's appointment and then I decided to go to the Mets game at the last minute. The doctor's appointment was at 6 p.m.
Chad, come on, it's the Mets. That's why.
I was like, if I don't show up to this appointment, they're going to charge me a $200 no-show fee, and that I'm not doing that. I'll just join from the game. The doctor was like, you are not at Citi Field right now. I turned the phone around. I'm like, there you go. See you on the big New York versus New York. It was a Subway Series. I wasn't going to miss the Yankees versus the Mets. It was amazing.
Dude, that's so funny.
The Mets have Wi-Fi. It was great. So talking about crypto, like, is there any, not other sites, but do the legitimate online casinos, do they do anything with crypto? Do you take bets in crypto? Does it have to be US dollars? Are there NFT, anything going on?
There are some sites that do some NFT style stuff. Frankly, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Hard Rock. Obviously, the Hard Rock paraphernalia is amazing, right? The stuff they have on the history of rock and roll and all of that, it's like priceless stuff. It'd be super cool to create NFTs out of that. It's definitely like something we've thought about, but right now there's no real concept around that. But there's some sites that do have NFT backed sort of sports trading card like stuff. I don't know. I don't know, like it's a little bit of an awkward fit for the regulated sports betting market to be backing these with cryptocurrency until, we have some sort of blockchain based US dollar, and then we'll talk about it, right?
Yeah. There's no regulation on it. Yeah. So you talked about analytics that you do to try to find maybe bad actors or, whatever, malfeasance, but are there any other just like interesting analytics insights that you've pulled out about the way people bet, people in this area like to make these kinds of bets? I don't know, just fun stories that you've seen in that space?
It's hard, you're in this space for long enough and what's a fun story to you kind of changes.
I mean, the classic example for analytics was always like, Pop-Tart sales go up at Walmart before hurricane hits, like that type of stuff.
Yeah, or people buy diapers with eggs or something. I can't remember what it was. Yeah.
I mean, it is funny when we, in this search for malfeasance, like we had built a visual of a stadium where we knew this sort of thing was going on. And it was interesting to watch people like try to front run and fail. So you're seeing like a bunch of bets come in that, this field goal is going to be made and it misses, or, like people trying to break the rules, but failing at it is always interesting.
Like counting cards, but actually doing it wrong.
Yeah. After your third cocktail, like the count is off and, you don't seem to care so much.
Let's pivot over and talk about AI, and maybe not just about, free will and all that, but let's talk about machine learning and you worked at Wolfram Alpha before you came into this gaming space, right? Or between gaming companies, I'm not sure, but you did a stint there. So, this dichotomy between the way a large language model works, which is relatively, it's fuzzy, there's randomness to it. You ask the same question, you're going to get different answers back because it walks the path differently, versus the way Wolfram Alpha works, which is all about perfect computability, right? You ask a question, you'll get the right answer, and you'll get the same answer back every time you ask it. So how do these two things play together in your mind?
But yeah, I've been in the sports betting space for 8 years now, maybe 9. But before that, I was, as you said, at Wolfram Research. I was part of their consulting arm. So we were doing custom implementations of Wolfram Alpha and solving all other sorts of machine learning and AI problems back before those words were nearly as buzzy as they are now. It's interesting, the evolution. Back then, I think my favorite machine learning algorithm was random forests. Random forest is just this like fairly easy to comprehend thing that's happening, even though it's like really sophisticated under the covers, but you're just building a billion decision trees and running it down all these decision trees, taking a sort of democratic vote of the outcomes and, doing a regression off of that or classification off of that, right? What I loved about them was they're so fast to set up. Like the time to get them going is really straightforward. They're robust to null values. They're robust to sort of non-normal distributions, all sorts of like great properties for application. And I've definitely been an application-oriented data scientist, right? Not so much in the theory side. That was all in the problem space of supervised learning, right? So you have inputs and you're trying to predict a known output. And that's, 90% of the problems we've faced at most companies, I would say, if you're not Google or Facebook and doing some really sophisticated image recognition type stuff, you're really trying to predict things, right? And model things with verifiable outcomes, right? And reduce the error of those predictions. And that's in the space of supervised learning. Then there's what was called unsupervised learning. You take a similar set of data, but rather than having an outcome that you're trying to model towards, you're handing a bunch of data off to an algorithm and you're sort of implying what it should try to minimize, what it should try to target, which is to maximally separate clusters of things, right? To give you the most separated groups on a many-dimensional vector of properties and separate out groups to give you separate clusters, right? That's an example of an unsupervised learning task. It's very common, but it's just a implied supervised task. The objective function is implied in the task of clustering, right? To maximize this distance. What's interesting with large language models and this, deep learning in general is it's almost what I call auto-supervised. The structure of the training for the problem is embedded in the input data. So you hand a bunch of text over and the large language like the deep learning model that's built there is iterating over every token in that sequence and building its own little version of what to train on. Generative AI is a great name for it because you're handing it the text and it's through the process is generating its own training set and training to that, which is a really cool paradigm. I used to hate neural networks exactly because they have this property of they can invent answers that outside the bounds of the problem. In sports betting, that's a really bad property. A hallucination can cost you a lot of money. But that's exactly why they're so exciting now, because those are different type of problems, but that's what drives all this cool behavior.
So I read the Wolfram paper on ChatGPT and what is ChatGPT really doing. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. I'm wondering, can you just explain to us, maybe level us up one level deeper? Because I understand that it's a prediction model. It's trying to predict the next word, right? It's been trained on, the corpus of human knowledge on the internet or whatever, right? So it's kind of the average of all of the internet's thinking. At least that's the way Wolfram described it on the Lex Friedman podcast. And I know that there's 175 billion parameters in GPT-4. What does that really mean? A parameter in the equation, what does that represent?
I guess it makes sense to look at a simple neural network, right? It's just a connection of little compute modules, right? Very simple programs that are turning on or turning off based on input signals coming into them, and then passing that signal forward to another module. You iterate through layers of neurons at the end, you see if what comes out looks like what you are targeting. Then there's an error term. If it doesn't match, you get a no. If it does match, you get a yes. And you pass that back through the process and adjust the weights. And the weights are those connections between all of these various neurons, right? So when you talk about parameters, you're talking about the weights between neurons, between passing information between layers of a deep neural network. And deep neural network is kind of arbitrary. What differentiates that from a normal neural network? The fundamental technology is the same. It's just scaled up magnificently. And what was surprising and, definitely not expected was back in, 2014. I'm sure people have been doing this even longer than that. These emergent capabilities started to come out, right? So just by sheer fact of scale of these models, they started to be doing things that were unanticipated. And then, recent advents of things like transformers, which all of that sort of stuff is basically re-architecting the way the neurons are connecting to each other inside these networks and where the feedback goes. So there are different configurations where it can feed back into itself or it can only feed forward. And the transformer gives it a more longer duration memory as well. But yeah, summary, like the whatever billion parameters, right? Those are just weights on neurons connecting to other neurons trained on trying to predict that next token. So every time they get it wrong, all the weights, all 750 billion parameters are tweaked a little bit to make it a little bit better.
So Mitch, if I'm simplifying this, what you're saying is like, when I see a model that has 175 billion parameters, that is 175 billion possible connections or pathways that a question that I ask could go through that model and come out with a result. Is that fair?
It actually goes through all 175.
It goes through all 175 every time.
Every time it generates a new token. Yeah. In parallel, right? Because that's what it's using the GPUs for to do that massive parallel thing.
But one neuron is not passing down that many parameters to the next neuron, right? Like they're working in parallel. So how many parameters are passed from one neuron to the next? And how does that grow? And like, where is that state maintained?
Yeah. So that's a question around architecture of a deep neural network. So architecture is, what do I connect to what? In general, the classic architecture is that every layer is connected to every other network, every other neuron in the next layer, right? So if you have 100 and 100, you've got, that cross of connections. That's how these things grow really quickly, really fast, is they have many layers and many neurons in every layer.
So ChatGPT has 400 layers. So it's got 175 million to the 400th power? 175 billion to the 400th power connections?
Well, each layer is laid out a little bit differently, right? So they're not all going to be the same size.
Okay.
They're not all going to be the same type of neuron even. But, roughly speaking, sure.
I liked what he said that there's only, this Wolfram on the Lex Friedman, there's only 50,000 English words or something like that. It's not like there's hundreds of billions of words that could be the next word, right? There's only like 50,000 if you're talking about generating English text. But so sometimes it'll get it wrong, right? Because there's fuzziness in the algorithm, it'll predict the next word to be wrong. And that error can keep compounding. So when you come back and you ask it, what you just said, is that correct? It can reprocess the whole thing and then say, no, that's not correct. But it couldn't do it in the middle. It couldn't detect its incorrectness as it was generating it, which I thought was interesting.
I'll share a link to one of my favorite video of, it's actually a, cognitive scientist who is tasked from Microsoft to determine if GPT-4 is self-aware or, has consciousness or whatever, right? And he takes his job very seriously and lays out all these different examples. But the interesting thing is not that I think doing this next token prediction, that it creates sentences that are coherent and conform to the English language, or even that there's sentences that are like semi-relevant.
Syntactically correct.
Yeah, like that's a neat trick, but it's not like the wild thing that's happening. The wild thing that's happening is it's emergent capabilities to do reasoning that you can tell it. One of the examples was, hey, you're an expert Wolfram language programmer, write a function that checks this phone number and sees if a phone number matches the US phone number standards. But I want you to write 3 unit tests of that function and evaluate those unit tests. And then if the unit tests fail, rewrite the function, right? So just iterating on that. And it produce the thing. And if you copy the code and ran it, sure enough, like the third unit test would fail, right? And you would say, hey, the third unit test fails. And it goes, oh, well, let me look into that, right? I'll go try a different way. And eventually it got down the path, and the human said, hey, why don't you try a pattern matching approach versus a pure functions approach, right? And then finally it tries this different programming paradigm in the Wolfram language, and voila, it passes the 3-unit test, right? But that is more than just like following from a prompt and creating sensible tokens thereafter. Like, it feels like you're interacting with an agent that understands concepts that you share in the world. And that's where I think these things feel pretty magical.
Is it fair to say that this is because our reasoning is baked into the text that we've written down on the web that these things were trained on? And so it's able to infer reasoning because of I'm losing the thought as I say it, but it's almost like it's inferring how we reason based on the output of humans, which is all this text that it's training on, right?
Right.
So when you say try again, it like understands what try again means because it shows up in all these different places where it knows what happened right before and what right after, kind of based on where it is in the vector almost, if that makes sense. Like,
our supposition was that OpenAI, and I have we're just purely guessing here, but our guess was that, it's so expensive for them to process one of your queries, right? I know it takes 30 cents for every query that they run, whereas a Google search takes 3 cents. So it's like 10 times more expensive than a regular Google search. And so our guess was that they were powering back. You would ask a query, they would just maybe not process all the parameters, or, I mean, I don't even know what, how I'm saying it, but basically they wouldn't send the full compute at your question. But then when you asked it, are you sure? Then they would send more compute at it, and then it'll get the right answer.
I don't think that's what's going on, but that would be a clever trick for them to save a buck. It's much more like what I think Steve mentioned, right? From digesting all these texts, if what you're tasked with is predicting what happens at the next token, if you're given enough resources and you're structurally designed, and I'm using you personifying this, network, but if you're given those two things, then with all this training data, the concept of error lives somewhere in your mathematical structures, right? So you start to develop this abstractionism inside the model, and it's not clear, like we can't dissect it and say, oh, there, that's where Euclidean geometry lives, right? But like a sophisticated enough model would actually distill those axioms. So one of the things that's interesting is how bad these models are at math generally.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. Like, why are they so bad at math?
And it's because they're doing this next token generation. So, the next token that comes after 4 plus 7 equals isn't always 11, right? It's just not. But at a certain level of sophistication, what I expect would happen is it will be able to say, oh, well, these are numerical tokens. This looks like an equation strung together. So I can't just do this next token generation thing. I need to think a few steps ahead and think a little bit more abstractly. Like, it's possible that kind of capability will just emerge. And then there's the other side, which is just, you shouldn't use large language models to do math. And when a large language model is tasked with doing math, we should just use normal computers, right? Which is kind of where plugins come in.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the merger of the Wolfram Alpha plugin with ChatGPT. ChatGPT could figure out, oh, you've asked me a math question. I'm not going to use the LLM. I'll just send it to Wolfram and get the answer back.
I think that, though, also becomes problematic because there isn't just one useful plugin. There's a lot. Eventually, knowing which plugin to go into for a given question becomes its own machine learning problem that you're having to solve.
Yeah, well, right now it just throws that question back at the user, right? Because I have to pick which plugins am I enabling for this particular query, right? So I know if I'm going to go show me the houses in Dallas, Texas, I'm going to use the Zillow plugin, right? Or if I'm going to ask a math question, I'm going to use that. But you're right. Yeah, ChatGPT's got to learn that over time.
I think the generative AI story, like large language models, are about to run out of runway in their current formulation. And I think we probably need another step function. It's probably in the vein of neural networks, but like some new architecture, some new invention that will allow us to reach beyond and transcend some of these hurdles.
Oh, interesting. So you think transformers, like that whole attention paper, you think that's like coming towards the end of its life. Like we're going to have another way to do it. It's not just we can keep iterating on this architecture.
I don't think we go from here to AGI.
Yeah, I don't either. Like people keep telling me AGI is coming, and I'm like, I don't see it yet.
Not based on any of the tools we've seen. But is that you're basically agreeing with Sam Altman saying that going to 1 trillion parameters from 175 billion parameters or whatever is not going to make a difference?
I think actually the more interesting stuff is, some of the stuff Google announced recently with their new, Bard and distilling these models into smaller packages so they can run in, on devices, right? So you don't have to do the whole thing and it can still have these foundational capabilities wherever you need them. I think that stuff is really interesting. But in terms of driving the, why can't this thing answer math problems? I think we're always going to be plagued with these bad hallucinations, and some of the hallucinations are delightful, right? That's where you get stable diffusion and the image generation stuff. But yeah, I don't know if a Frankenstein of plugins will get us there either.
What about the working memory problem? Because you'll ask it a question and it seems like it loses track of kind of what it said already. If your prompt is too long or you asked it to do too much, like I can ask it to generate a function of code, but I can't ask it to generate a whole program at once. So I need to take this iterative approach. So it's kind of working in small chunks because it kind of forgets what it did before. Even though, right, it's got this outer loop that's taking all the text, right, that is generated already to generate the next word. And then it generates that word and it puts that whole thing back to get the next word again, right? Why does it, if it's doing that in this outer loop, why is it losing track and kind of going off on the wrong path?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know on that. I can imagine that as the size of the input embeddings on the text you're putting in grow and grow, right? The signal for any particular part of it drops off. And so the error from extrapolation there just compounds upon itself. But, it's also the fact that when you do the reinforcement with humans, right? They're not testing like putting in whole novels and then did the answer work out, right? A lot of that human training, which is really one of the keys here, is that they've hammered this with human beings and said, this is what I want. This is not what I want, right? In terms of a conversation. I think that stuff happens with much smaller token inputs. And so it's just gotten a lot better at that.
Yeah, the reinforced human learning. So I did this thing. I had a night, let's just say I had a night of increased creativity. Okay. From some external forces. I started ruminating. So I asked ChatGPT, write a rom-com movie summary about a world where people use bots to go on simulated dates with each other before meeting in real life. Right? This sort of idea that like, okay, if I could digitize every human on the planet, then I could just run a simulation where every human dates every other human and it'll tell me who the best person for me is. And it'll find my perfect match. Right? But then the bots start scheming to find people who are actually the opposite of a good match because the bots become malicious. And then hijinks ensue, and it turns out the couples actually fall in love anyway. Now, tell me that's not a great idea for a modern AI rom-com.
I'm sensing a Black Mirror episode.
That's where I was going to.
So
total Black Mirror.
That's the full prompt, okay? And it come back, and it titled the movie Love Bot Roulette. In a near future, the dating scene has evolved, and people rely on highly advanced AI bots to go on simulated dates. And, it goes on and on. The bots decide to pair people with their polar opposites. Chaos and hilarity unfolds. They discover they find love in the most surprising places. So, and then it creates a plot, and then I ask it to create, a 5-act play. And then what's the first scene in the first, kind of going through this. And as it goes through, so I have the main characters, but they need to have, the girl needs to have a best girlfriend and the guy needs to have a guy friend, right? You got to have these supporting cast. And how do they meet? You got to have all these subplots, and how do they meet? What's the introducing? And so it creates like 9 characters, right? And as I'm at it, and I keep going, and I ask it to make this scene, make the next scene. How do they have a party? They do this, they do that. Oh, I just can't, I can't meet a good guy. Nothing's working. She's talking to a girl. And then suddenly, like, the character names just change all out of nowhere, right? Because it lost track of where it was. And I was like, oh, this is so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting, like, prompt engineer kind of makes me chuckle a little bit because it's interesting, but there is something there in
100%.
What do I need to feed to it every time, right? To make sure that it remembers these key details. And like, when you're talking about enterprise, I think the natural use case for this stuff is a chatbot, a customer facing chatbot, but it's tough, right? Like it can't say the bad thing, and it needs to stay on the rails, and it needs to remember the person's name, and
The way I think about, why do these AI systems have these, weaknesses or, things that they're not good at? It's the same thing if you think about like Newton's laws. Newton's laws are an approximation of what actually happens in the real world. Someone smart looked at what was happening in the real world and they made these formulas, and they're pretty good, but they're not 100% accurate. And there's things that, happen in the real world that they don't predict. And so then someone else has to make a better model and you get to relativity or whatever, right? Well, these AIs, these LLMs are reduction, right? They don't actually represent exactly what's happening in our brain because that's not computable yet. And we don't fully understand it. So we haven't gotten there. So it is not an accurate representation of everything a human could do for that reason.
Yeah, I agree. I think a part of that is the word general, right? Like a general thinking machine can understand a naive move cleanly in Go and just say, yeah, I dominated you there. I know how that works, right? But we are still building these kind of semi-fragile towers, right? Even though they're amazing in their lane.
Well, until you can solve the game, right? No one's even solved chess yet, right? There's no formal proof that we've played every possible chess game that could ever be played. And, white will always win. We can guarantee 100% of the, like we can with tic-tac-toe, right? We know that you can always tie at tic-tac-toe. Or we know that you can always win if you're the first person to move at checkers or whatever, because those games are simpler. But they haven't done that with chess, and they haven't done that with Go. Unless you have a game that is, but they will, right? Theoretically, you could, right? You could play every single chess game possible, right? You could play every single Go game possible, and then just know, well, the first move will always, whoever has the first mover advantage will always win because they can do this path and they're guaranteed to win every time. But there are games where that's not true because there's randomness involved, right? Like poker or whatever. Any game where there's randomness involved, backgammon or something.
I feel where you're going, but even with poker, right? There's a group that they basically mathematically built the game theoretic optimal way to play poker, right? So there's no way to game the randomness out of the way the cards come out. But given any set of cards and any set of opponents, there's a right play, right? There's a right bet size.
I understand that there's GTO optimal things, but I don't know that I've seen a mathematical proof that it's done. It seems like
I've seen economic proof in the shrinking of online poker, right? Like as soon as optimized bottles come in.
Okay, that's interesting. So what I was thinking was, because Wolfram talks about that, is there an apex intelligence? Can there ever be an apex intelligence? And he says there can't be, because even if you made a Turing machine that ran, longer than any other Turing machine that ever ran, you can still go one step further and make a Turing machine that runs longer than that. And there's no end to it.
Yeah. One of the most interesting ideas I think that Stephen talks about is computational irreducibility. And this stems from his maniacal drive to understand simple programs and how complexity emerges out of simple programs. But when you see something like the Rule 30 cellular automata produce as good randomness as any known system, you start to realize that we can't predict what that is. And that is a simple program that you can write the program for it in one line, right? It's very, very easy. You can look at it and understand what's happening. The outcome of that happening over and over again on itself, totally unpredictable, right? The only way to get to line 110 state of the Rule 30 cellular automaton is to run it 110 times and see what the state is. That's the same as, the only way to tell what this flower is going to look like is to grow the flower. We don't have a good model for how these complex processes unfold. And so computational irreducibility is that concept where above a certain threshold, there just isn't a shortcut. And that could be true for us, right? It might be the case to build a general intelligence. You just have to basically model all the fundamental abstractions in the brain. It's probably substrate independent, but maybe there's some reason why it's not, right? But there's no shortcut to get to what it's like to be a human other than to just basically be a human.
Well, I think we have this weird idea, maybe it's not weird, but we have this idea that other things can be perfected when we're not perfect. Now, I know I don't speak for everybody, but I don't think I'm perfect. And so if I'm building something and I'm holding it to the standard of perfection or completion, I think that's like a Sisyphean task. We'll never get there. It'll never be done. It'll never be perfect. And so we need to stop thinking in those terms. We can't think that this thing's ever going to be AGI. It's 17, then it's 18, then it's 25, then it's 45, then it's,
It just keeps getting better.
Yeah, it just keeps getting better, and there will be no end to it as far as we know, because there's no end to us evolving as far as we know yet.
Yeah, and better just means more useful for humans, right? With fewer negative consequences.
Able to do more with less supervision, just like a kid, right? I think that's how I think about it. I want my kids to be adults. So I'm going to teach them the things to help them make the decisions to get to adulthood. And then when I'm no longer supervising them, I hope that they're self-supervising. But it's never just me, right? There's that saying, if it takes a village. It's a lot of people influencing their mental constructs and their mental models of the world. Eventually, they are self-supervising. Most people are. We're making mistakes, yet we hold this technology to a completely different standard. And I think that means that we get really excited and hyped up when something like ChatGPT comes out and it makes us do things that, in hindsight, are idiotic.
I actually think that most people aren't self-supervising. I think that because we're getting feedback from other people all the time.
Well, this goes back to the question you asked at the very beginning, is like free will and stuff like that.
Well, not just free will, but it goes to Mitch's point about how he feels like, how do you define yourself? And he's saying myself is my representation of my chemicals of my body and my brain. But the truth is, like, he exists in a larger context where we are. He's getting feedback from us. Is he really himself, or are we really one thing together?
Chad, you just broke my brain.
And that's the nature of spirituality, where we exist in this larger thing and we're all sort of together and we're not separate individuals.
I don't think there's anything less magical, though, about it all being physical, right? About it all being fundamentally physics happening. But to me, that makes it more magical, right? The fact that it can feel like this, to be a pattern in physics just playing out, and that we can have a connection with other patterns. And, just because you understand something doesn't mean it's not magnificent.
Well, and we are the original distributed system for, depending on how far back in time you go, like it's a collective intelligence versus an individual intelligence. And we only come up with this stuff by working together.
All intelligence is collective intelligence. I mean,
that's part of that.
Emil taught us, right?
Yeah, Emil taught us. So maybe it's just all these LLMs eventually working together to form a better LLM. There's no reason to think that one LLM is going to be the end all be all. Why can't the LLMs become more like human beings in the sense that they're working together to kind of get better, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
A super collective?
Yeah, something? It's like a super collective of the LLMs.
Well, one of the things I really liked from Sam Altman and the just ChatGPT in general was his statement that waiting and hoping for regulatory frameworks or something else is not actually going to get you the safety you're hoping for around these things. And that the safe path is to actually expose them to the public and have more and more people banging against them, right, in varied ways to like hone them in. And I was kind of in the existential threat camp before hearing that argument. And I think he kind of persuaded me that, yeah, I think like getting them out early and often so we can collectively shape how they evolve, versus just developing them in a basement and then unleashing them on the world when they actually are super powerful and, there's nothing we can do to put the genie back in the bottle. I don't know. Maybe there will be wisdom in that.
Well, nobody can really develop them in the basement because it takes billions of dollars of GPUs. So there's only a few companies in the world that can even do it. But I mean, the fact that all of these people who are much, much smarter than me, I mean, Carmack was saying he's not worried about AGI destroying the world. Wolfram is not worried about AGI destroying the world. All right, I'm not going to worry about it either.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it.
Those guys are way smarter than me and they're not worried about it. At least there's other problems to worry about right now.
Well, if I can't tell my AI to turn the lights off without it flushing the toilet at the same time, I'm not really worried about it. So one of the things I've been thinking about a little bit lately is like along these lines of when do you regulate? How do you regulate for something so new? I was thinking about like when the first cars were introduced and how laws evolved after the automobiles became a thing. Like one of the first laws was actually registering your vehicle. And in hindsight, it's like, well, that's pretty obvious. How are we going to know how many they are, who owns them? So if something bad happens, we know who to hold accountable. And it's kind of that same thing. It's like you unleash a bunch of automobiles on the world, and next thing you know, you have to build the roads. You have to make sure people are on the right side of the road. You have to make sure they're stopping in the right places. And so I think about it kind of like that, is like we will develop these traffic laws for AI as we go. You can't just sit down and think you're going to solve it at the beginning. And to their point, it'll stifle innovation. So I'm a big fan of, fuck around and find out. That's what we're doing. That's what it feels like. I don't think there's a better way to do it.
I think both things could be true at once, right? It could be fundamentally unsafe, but also there could be no better way to do it.
I'll worry about it when we get there. For now, I can't even write a movie script for me. So let's.
I don't know. It sounded like you had a good start chat?
No, the summary and the plot summary is phenomenal. Absolutely. I'm going to send it to you after this, Mitch. It's phenomenal. It's great. I would, if someone turned that into an actual script, and it's like, oh, I want, Jennifer Aniston and whoever, right? Matthew McConaughey can make it this rom-com. Like, it would be a fucking hit out of the gate, 100%. Oh, I even asked it. He said, you have these characters, like, cast, who is the optimal cast? And it gave me the optimal cast. And I was like, okay, that's cool, but that's very expensive. Recast it, assuming I only have a $10 million budget. Yeah. And it recast it with like younger, like less known actors and actresses that would fit my budget better. I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
That's so funny.
It did a great job.
It's stuff like that makes me like, okay, maybe it is smarter than we give it credit for. Like, I don't know.
It really is. Oh, hold on. I do have one kind of closing question. So do you think that, well, it's trained on our knowledge. So it doesn't even know things that we don't know, right?
That's not true. Like, when it's able to do this abstraction, it can solve logical puzzles that have never been solved in English, right?
But it hasn't created new mathematical theorems, right? We've never seen an AI do that, have we? Discovered them, I mean.
Yes, Stephen reliably just uses his new kind of science approach and searches the computational space for new theorems, like proving a bunch of things, searching the space at random. It's not the same as an LLM, but
has it ever proved, has it proved a theorem that is relevant to like the math that we understand?
Yeah, like the Wolfram language actually uses certain theorems that were proved just by brute force search through the space of all possible theorems to optimize certain things under the covers. I mean, I've heard that from Stephen. I don't know those algorithms myself, but basically my point is, I think we give human abstractions around what it means to know things and understand things a little too much weight.
As opposed to what?
Well, I don't think, like, these LLMs can do things that are not in the data. They're not in the training data, right? Nowhere in it was the answer to that question. Nowhere in it was the script you wrote. They truly are generative in a real sense, and increasingly with higher levels of abstraction that allow them to do more and more impressive things. So I don't know where it stops.
It's almost like you could ask it, what is the relationship between two completely opposite things that you aren't thinking about and might be able to come up with something new? But you have to know to ask the question, which begs the next question, which is, well, is it new if you had the question, just not the answer?
Yeah, the Microsoft, I'll send a link that you should share, but the Microsoft neuroscience guy, like, he does a theory of mind style question, like Sam and Jen have a cat and, Jen puts the cat in a basket and then Sam goes to work and then Jen takes the cat out of a basket and puts it in the ottoman. Sam comes home. Where does everyone think the cat is, right? And it nails it. It's like Sam thinks the cat's in the basket. Jen thinks the cat's in the ottoman. The cat thinks it's in the ottoman. The ottoman doesn't think anything because it's an ottoman, right? It like even has these funny answers.
I would like to see it. The one thing I haven't been able to see it write jokes, like
it's not bad. It does dad jokes.
No, I agree, but I'm saying like truly funny, like the kinds of things that you might see a professional comic do, right? It does.
I think that's probably the rails it's on, though. Jokes are notoriously a scary place to generate content. Yeah.
Well, but also the best jokes, in my opinion, they are born out of really insightful observations about human nature. And so if it can't observe these things and connect these dots on its own, then it won't be able to produce these great, deep gut laugh jokes, I think. I don't know.
Or just deep analysis of something. That's the next level, right?
All right, well, Chad, let's bring this balloon down to the ground because we got to run. We've been talking for a while.
You know what? We started at the beginning. I said I didn't know where this conversation was going to go, and I did not know where it was going to go. And it was fascinating, Mitch. Thank you very much for coming on the pod today. It was a great conversation. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
All right, guys, if you like this episode, share it out on LinkedIn. Tell one other person about it and help us grow the episode. And then we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Mitch. And have a nice night.